Well, welcome. My name is Sharif Abdelhamid. I'm the Associate Director of Service Learning, and I've been really happy to get to lead this trip. This is our 4th annual trip to West Virginia and to visit the Appalachian region. You're going to hear a lot today about what we learned, who we visited, who we met, and maybe we could just each introduce ourselves, just who you are, what program you are in or were in, and then we'll get started.
I'm Leah Baumsberger, and I just graduated in December from the Accelerated Nursing Program, so thank you. And I am an RN, BSN, and I am in the new residency program at Children's Hospital. Thank you.
My name is Kate. I was also in the January Accelerated program. Last year.
And I'm Jenna. I was also in the January group last year and just found out I passed NCLEX and just got an offer this morning at PSL. So, woohoo! Very excited.
I'm Joni Jonell, and I'm retired faculty, but I come back and teach a little bit, and I've had the privilege of going on 3 of the 4 trips, so I love these students.
I'm Monica Milburn, and I'm in the May Accelerated class.
Don't worry about me. I'm Ola Mogren. I'm actually the only choice 2014 student in this group and the only male student in this group as well. So I currently am not an RN and have no offers at this time.
I'm Alicia White, May Accelerated group also, so no job, just in school.
And I'm Annie White, and I'm also in the May Accelerated. 8 weeks, 3 days to go.
And my name is Melissa. I graduated in December as well.
And I'm Charlotte Richetti. I'm School of Pharmacy faculty. Do you want me to start off? So Sharif asked me to try to start off the presentation and kind of kick off the mood for all of the students. And that's a little hard to do without going into detail in all of the wonderful experiences that we had during our trip. So I'm just going to start off with a little bit of my take on the trip and what I felt my role was, and then turn it over to the wonderful nursing students and nurses to really fill in the details about the experience of this Appalachian immersion. When I first signed up to do the trip, I have to say I was a little bit unsure of what my role was. I had gone on one previous cultural immersion trip with Sharif, and at the end of it felt a little empty. What was my role? What impact did I have? And I think that was part of the reason that I signed up for this trip, is I was looking for something to be engaged in, something to call, yeah, this is what I am passionate about. This is what I want to divert my energies towards. Appalachia is about an hour away from where my family is, where I grew up. Youngstown, Ohio has had a huge economic decline over time, and so I see very similarities in where I grew up and Appalachia itself. And so those were some of the reasons that I signed up. But again, I was a little skeptical. What is my role here with a bunch of nursing students as a pharmacy faculty? And I will say, as we planned the trip and we got to know each other, it was really quick for me to see how energetic these students were, how engaged they were, how caring and compassionate they were. So that got me excited. And then I learned that one of their big service projects would be revolving around drugs of abuse in the area and giving an education topic or dialogue on prescription drugs of abuse. So I was like, okay, I'm a pharmacist. I have a role. But there was still that little bit of skepticism. What is my role? What impact am I really going to have in a week? What are we really going to do to change what's going on in Appalachia? I think it was the second night we were there, Joni gave us all reflections, and it was supposed to be silent, and it was supposed to be personal for you. And mine read, "Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And given my mind state on what were we going to do there, what was our role, it really didn't make sense to me. I was still kind of questioning, why was this message meant for me? And without going too much, because I think that's the job of everyone else here, to explain all of the experiences that we had and the lessons learned that we experienced during this trip, I can just skip to the end and tell you I know why that message was meant for me. I was meant to go on that trip to be inspired by the Larry Gibsons and the Beth Collins and the Beth Spencers and the Sister Pats, to see people who were so active and passionate about their causes and what they were working towards. It left me with this feeling that's what I need to do. When I come home, I need to question my life. How am I using the resources that I'm given and the privilege that I'm given? Am I a role model to my students? Am I a leader in service to others in the way that I practice my pharmacy? So I am very much looking forward to going back if that opportunity presents itself. I hope that the students can help fill in the gaps from where I went from not being sure to knowing that this was a trip that inspired me. And just to kind of give you a little bit of insight of maybe the motives or the inspiration for the people who planned the trip and organized the trip, I wrote down something that Beth Collins said, and she's the director of the Appalachian Institute who strategically planned each experience with Sharif so that we would have the best opportunity to learn about this region. And she said, "I hate fluffy immersion trips. I don't want you going home feeling good about yourselves. There's no going and building a house in a weekend and saying, I did this, and then seeing a final product. There is no final product. You should be uncomfortable and question what you see, because it's only with discomfort and unease that change will happen."
Hi. Kate and I are going to be talking about some of the stereotypes that exist around Appalachia and discussing a little bit about how damaging those can be. Appalachia seems to have a disproportionately high number of stereotypes that float around about it, and up here are just a couple of those. The top left is from a movie called Wrong Turn. I don't know if you guys saw it. It was terrible. But it's just sort of your typical horror movie. I mean, someone liked it because I think they've made 5 or 6 installments of it at this point. But it was about a group of college students whose van breaks down on a road trip in West Virginia, and they get picked off one by one by murderous inbred hillbillies. And while I don't think that anyone actually saw that as an accurate depiction of who Appalachians are, I think it kind of represents the hillbilly as monster theme, which is actually pretty common in film. The bottom left, the paddle faster I hear banjos, is a reference to Deliverance that has kind of the same hillbilly as monster theme. Hillbillies are, they're to be feared and they're to be avoided if possible. And what's funny, before I went on the trip, my mom actually repeated this to me and repeated this phrase. And my mom is this sweet little lady who would never purposely hurt anybody, but she, perpetuated the stereotype without really thinking anything of it. So the middle one is, I think that's Honey Boo Boo's mom. I'm actually kind of proud that I don't know for certain who that is. But she's quoted as saying, "I'm not all about them big finagly words." And while that's kind of funny, it trivializes it trivializes the barriers to education that exist, most likely for her and certainly for a lot of people in Appalachia. So her ignorance becomes something that's entertaining and something to kind of laugh at. Similarly, with the hillbillies heath, it trivializes the fact that medical care and dental care is also difficult for people to get. That West Virginia in particular has the highest rate of people losing all of their teeth by age 65. But when you consider that the state has one of the lowest median incomes and has one of the highest poverty rates, not surprisingly, dental care isn't something that they can afford to prioritize. And then the top one, I don't know if you can read that, but it says, "I'm not a redneck, I'm an Appalachian American." And that's something that I'd never actually heard before. So I was kind of going through what that meant to me. And I think on the surface, I read it as saying redneck is kind of a negative term, and so they were trying to kind of take it back and have some sort of pride in it. But it also seems sort of sad to me because it says, this is how people view me, and I accept that. And there's something just sort of sad and powerless about what that says, about what stereotypes do to people. So I think Kate may talk about kind of how we heard about that on our trip.
Thank you. So I just want to start off with one of our first meetings with Sharif when we were preparing to go. The first question he asked us is, what do you know about this region, and what are your views of Appalachia and the Appalachian people? And we're all people who signed up to do a service trip there, so I like to think that we're open-minded and, I don't know, like had something going for us, but we didn't, because we had all the same answers that the media portrays, which is, we thought of that area as backwards and dirty and poor, and I think someone even said, like, missing teeth, crooked teeth. And so it's really, it's indisputable that there are these perceptions of that area and how easy it was to find these images. And as Jenna was kind of referencing, we really laugh about that. The media has a whole industry about that with Honey Boo Boo and what is the show? Buck Wild, thank you. Yeah, Duck Dynasty, Moonshiners, all of that. I mean, there's just countless TV shows and movies, and we show these people in their natural setting, and we just kind of watch them and sit on our couches and laugh and think that they're so backwards and they're so wrong and they're so disadvantaged, and we just kind of think it's funny. And so this trip was a really neat opportunity for us to realize that it's not funny and to examine why that exists. And Charlotte talked about Beth and some of the amazing speeches she gave us that got us to really think through these things. And one thing I remember her saying was, the reason we do that is because it's so much easier to just say, oh, those hillbillies, they don't have any teeth, than to question why. Why do they often lose their teeth before age 65, And it is because they don't have health care, or if they could afford it, it's not available in that area, or the water and the food and the nutrition that they have access to is insufficient, So instead of understanding why these stereotypes exist and that these problems exist, we just laugh at them and choose not to think about it because it's easier and it's funnier. So I think that's a lot of what I took away. And when we had our post-trip meeting, one of the words that we knew we wanted to represent here at this meeting was dignity. And so it kind of tied in here. We I think, often societally choose to not give this area of the country their fair share of dignity instead of wondering why we see them as different than ourselves.
So there were so many experiences that we had on this trip, and it's very difficult to summarize them. But Melissa and I are going to try to just talk a little bit about coal and energy. Those of you that know West Virginia know that coal is king out there, and we saw that every single step of the way. We had the opportunity to visit Cayford Mountain, which is actually a very, very small land preserve that they've tried to preserve from the coal companies in order to try to bring some awareness to this region about coal. I know this sounds really trivial, but every single time I switch on a light or plug in my computer or my iPod or my iPad, whatever, all the other electronics that I have, I never, ever thought about where my energy comes from, and I don't think any of us really do. When we were standing on that mountain, we were told that we were standing on over $6 million worth of coal. $6 million. 600 million, thank you. 600 million. And that was just in 59 acres. We had the privilege to walk up on a little ridge and view mountaintop removal, which is what the picture you see above there. They will literally blow off mountaintops in order to get to 32 inches of coal, a 32-inch seam of coal. Can you imagine them doing that to the Rockies? I mean, we would have a fit here. We would have an absolute fit. And I don't think I truly realized how that $600 million worth of coal that we were standing on had such an impact on the people and the community. we met people that their lives were threatened for trying to save that mountain. We met people whose sons and husbands were coal miners and went miles and miles and miles down into the earth to extract this coal in order for us to turn on our light switches. And yet they see so little of that $600 million. This is the most impoverished county in the entire state. And it was just mind-boggling to me. And what it really brought home for me, and you'll kind of see near the end of this presentation, was why just West Virginia? I mean, we're talking about energy everywhere in the United States. There's fracking going on right now in our backyard. And I don't know if you guys know what fracking is. I'm sure you've heard a lot about it on the news. I didn't know a lot about it until I went to West Virginia. And it wasn't until I saw what was impacting, how coal impacted a whole entire history, a community, and their future generations, that I realized that this is happening everywhere. And my takeaway was that I needed to learn more about energy and what I believed in and what I believe the solution would be for our future. So I think Melissa's going to talk a little bit more about like the people, but at the end, I want to kind of we want to have a call to action, and we're going to ask you to really start thinking about like what your role is in all this. So.
Okay, so like Leah had mentioned, this is a really big topic, and we don't have very much time to talk on it. But something that I did take back or gather from this experience was, like Leah had mentioned too, we consume so much, and we use so much energy, and we don't know where it comes from. But going here and seeing the destruction of these mountains used to be like 2,500 feet higher, and now this mountain that we were on was the valley, and now it's the highest point because all of the mountains around it had been destroyed. And it was really moving because it just felt like we were taking from them their natural resources and at a blatant disregard for what they had and how much we use. And also with mountaintop removal, streams are being contaminated, people's water is undrinkable. Like, there are tons of consequences on the environment and the people, and just the impact that it has, and it's going to have for generations and generations to come. And if we're not doing anything, it's just going to keep on going, and we're just turning a blind eye to it and using, our computers, and it's fun and it's convenient, and that doesn't mean anything to me because I have clean water. And so there's something else I want to say, but I have to keep going. So, thank you. And if I remember, I'll say it again.
So what Leah and Melissa were talking about, Leah mentioned this little tour that we did of Cayford Mountain. I want to show you a quick video. This is Larry Gibson Jr. in this video giving this tour to another group of students. As you can see on the day we were there, that's an umbrella turned inside out. It wasn't nearly as beautiful as the weather as this video shows, but this kind of gives you a sense of what we saw. So that's this video here.
What they want, all I want to do is to save my people and to save my mountains. Now, all this right here is co-owned. Here is a mine site. Here is where you're going to see devastation. You tell me what that looks like down there when we get up top here. How they call this for trains? Put the tree there, and push the rock. This is solid rock, waste. Nothing's gonna grow here. See this grass? Reach down and pull a chunk of this up. It's all brown underneath. See that? This is all poison. Animals can't eat this. Look how they leave the land. See, there's the town of Waitsfield. That's going to be gone in 5 years. there's a stream down there. They already started valley fields. From that point, 40 miles down that way. How can you destroy somebody's drinking water and poison our kids? You know,
So I'm going to sit in the rocking chair because anybody that knows me or has ever been on a trip with me knows that if there's a rocking chair in the room, I'm sitting in it. So I actually wanted to tell you a little bit about this person, Larry Gibson, and a really cool experience I had. Larry Gibson, that's actually Larry Gibson Jr., and this is his dad, Larry Gibson Sr. And Larry Gibson is kind of a celebrity in the mountaintop removal activist world. It's like if you know about mountaintop removal, you've heard Larry Gibson's name. And I'm really fortunate that I have done this trip several times. I met lots of really amazing people, but I had never met Larry Gibson Sr. before because we'd never had a chance to go on Cayford Mountain, so this is our first opportunity. Well, Larry Gibson Sr. passed away on top of that mountain in November. And Larry Gibson Jr. took over the role of giving these tours and took over the Cayford Foundation. And I think it speaks to some of what we heard from Leah about, how important this land and the connection to the land is to people, and people that never would have envisioned themselves as activists in this world take on the role of activism because it's important to them. And I mentioned that because I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do when we take students on these trips and when we send students out doing service learning. We don't know what our place can be in this world, but you never know when something's going to happen that strikes you to become an activist. And then I also wanted to share a story that really meant a lot to me with Larry Gibson Jr. In Appalachian culture, death is a really significant thing for people, and in most cultures, but some examples of that, like if somebody asks you to dig their grave, like they know that they're getting ready to die and they invite you to dig their grave, that's like the highest honor that somebody can give you. And when families have family reunions, they don't do them at parks, they do them at cemeteries because they want to have their family, their ancestors, be a part of their family reunions. So Larry Gibson's dad had died about a month before we were there, and he was buried on top of their little piece of land that they were preserving. And as you could see, Larry Gibson Jr. is a little person, and he had been wanting to put a Christmas tree on his father's grave for a couple of weeks, but he couldn't get the tree up there. So it was a really big honor when he asked me to help him place this Christmas tree at the foot of his father's grave. And I never met Larry Gibson Sr., but he was with us that day, and it was a really powerful experience for me and just really spoke to me about how important people are in West Virginia and helping to preserve that land. So I wanted to share that story.
Sorry, but I remembered what I was going to say. And one of the things that really impacted me, too, while we were there was I asked the leader of our trip, so is coal bad? Do you want all this mining to stop? And she said no, which really surprised me. And she said, we need energy, and we consume so much that we need it. But there has to be some foresight in the way that we extract our energy, and we have to do it responsibly and know the consequences behind it. And so I just wanted to kind of follow up this talk about energy with and what Leah had said about fracking in our backyard. We do need to know how to do it responsibly because we do use so much. And then on the flip side, look at how much you're using and can you cut back somewhere, because, it isn't a limitless resource that we have. So, thank you.
Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is healthcare, which since you guys are all going into nursing, I'm sure you're all very interested in, or some kind of healthcare profession. And so that was a big reason that a lot of us went on this trip, was to learn about the healthcare disparities that do exist in the region, and just to figure out a little more, is there anything we can do? How is it different from where we are? How is it the same? And so we ended up at the very, very bottom of West Virginia in this little tiny town called Kermit that's not even on a map. And there was a lady there whose name is Sister Pat, who moved from Chicago. So she went from one humongous city to the middle of nowhere. And she, along with this organization called Able Families, helps all of the families in the region with everything from education to health care to providing resources. And based out of that, there's a group of women known as MyHow workers, and they are maternal infant health outreach workers. And I think that for the majority of us who went on the trip, that was a very large thing that impacted our experience. And so basically these women are just lay people from the community who have signed up to provide pregnancy teaching, prenatal care, and from like 0, from conception to 3 years old, they go into the homes of women in the neighborhoods, and they go in and they provide them with, if they can't afford clothes, if they can't afford food, if they just don't really know what's going on with their bodies or can't afford to get to the doctor, those kinds of things. Also, you can kind of tell from the pictures, West Virginia is hugely hilly and mountainous, and just geographically really, really hard to get to healthcare resources. So in Denver, we all know there's 1,000 hospitals. There's pretty much a clinic on every corner. If we have a health need, we can make it happen. We can get to a doctor and somebody can assess us. They unfortunately don't have this luxury. So these women take time out of their very busy schedules, and they are amazing human beings. And so the biggest problem they have right now down there that Charlotte kind of touched on is the drug addiction problems. And so we came in and we kind of gave them a little spiel on recognizing drug addiction and drug abuse and what they can try and do. And Alicia will share a little bit more about that just on the stories that we heard from them. But long story short, there were 4 or 5 women, I think, that we talked to. One of them she was adopted when she was really young. She shouldn't even, honestly, at this point still be alive, and yet she has 3 kids. Her husband's a coal miner, and she has done everything possible to find a job and build herself up and, like, to fight the stereotypes, essentially. And so they're just amazing people.
Yeah, they're very inspiring. Like Annie said, I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the reasons we were there talking to the MyHow workers. We were teaching them about, they know about prescription drug abuse, and they're seeing that in their communities. It's a very big issue. So we were coming just to kind of facilitate a dialogue about what they can do, how to recognize it, and things like that. But some of the stories they told us really stood out to me, how this drug abuse is really affecting their communities. One story that really stood out to me, they told us about this elderly couple. I think they had both been diagnosed with cancer, so they were both on painkillers dealing with this issue. And these are very small communities, so they told us everybody basically knows who has access to pills, who doesn't. And somebody came to their house, stole their drugs, burnt down their house, and both of them died just to get at the drugs. And these are prescription drugs that are available, but this is obviously like a huge, huge issue. We also talked to a lady working in a clinic. People knew that she worked in a health clinic, and they would accost her in the grocery store asking her for drugs. So she ended up changing jobs because she didn't feel safe, understandably. But it's a significant issue. It drives people to do things that they wouldn't normally do, because addiction is a serious disease. You really feel like you're going to die if you can't get these drugs. So after we learned about this with the MyHow workers, we went to a methadone treatment facility to learn about how they're treating these addictions. And methadone is one way that they do that. So it's basically substituting one addiction with another. Basically, methadone allows you to function socially. You're not doing everything you can to get this other drug. You can get methadone legally, but it's not an ideal fix. It's a very dangerous drug also. But something that really stood out to me from being at this clinic, the counselor who was kind of giving us an introduction, the first thing that he told us was, this is a for-profit company, and so we really don't have an incentive to get people off of methadone. There's no incentive for prevention, then there's no incentive for education. We're taking advantage of these people's addictions. Basically, they are helping. It is a good thing, but it's not a long-term solution. It's just a short-term fix. But I kind of wanted to bring this back home, because this is not, it's not just West Virginia that struggles with this. This is a significant issue in Colorado as well. I have a few short statistics. In 2010, 2 times as many people died from prescription drug overdoses as from drunk driver-related accidents in Colorado. And 33% of high school students in Denver abuse prescription medications. So this is a significant issue in Colorado as well. And as nurses, we see it in the hospital. People are called drug seekers who come to the hospital for this. And I think they're looked down on. People talk about them very negatively, but And it's understandable. It's hard when you have patients dying of other diseases to feel, to understand what they're going through with these drug addictions. But I think that something that really was significant to me, I think that we really need to learn about these addiction issues and understand and have respect for these patients' dignity, like we've kind of been talking about. Give them their dignity. They are struggling with the disease also. And I think that as nurses, we're supposed to be advocating for and caring for our patients. And this is an issue that we really need to learn about so we can really help them, not just push them aside for patients who we think have more significant diseases. So those are kind of the lessons that we learned around drug addiction in West Virginia.
I have my little gifts here, my gold and silver wrapped packages. And this trip always takes place in early December. And friends of mine have said, how can you, leave your family right in December, the busiest time getting ready for Christmas? And yes, I missed a granddaughter's choral program, and I missed my book club tea. But the gifts that I received on this trip, being with 8 fabulous students and 2 other wonderful faculty, far outmeasure any gifts or time that I would have been spending at the grocery store, at the mall, whatever, baking cookies. So I just want to talk a little bit about the gifts that we received. And one of the biggest gifts was meeting wonderful, wonderful people in West Virginia. And as my postcard says, and it's to my husband sitting up there, who's my Jim, I met a new man in West Virginia, and his name is James, and he was 6 years old, and he's sitting over there. I don't know why I fell in love with James, but I truly did. One of the opportunities that we had while we were there was to work with the children from the Laughlin Memorial Chapel, and they are children who come there for an after-school program. And then during December, they always have an opportunity to have gifts. They have kind of a little shop for the children, and they can go and select gifts for their mother and father or whoever they would like to. So I happened to be paired with James, and he was so shy and so adorable. And so he was picking out things for his mom and his dad, and we had one bow, and then he sort of, was kind of squirming, and I said, what's going on? And he said, so let's say he had the silver bow, and he said, I wish they had gold bows. And so I said, oh, why is that? And he said, well, every Christmas morning we watch that movie Rudolph, and Burl Ives sings silver and gold, and that's my mom's favorite thing. So he wanted to find a gold bow for his mother's package. So I just think this little 6-year-old taught me one of the most memorable lessons, that he just out of his heart, that's what he wanted to do. So luckily someone opened another bag of bows, and we were able to find the gold bow that he needed. The other gift that I received was another little lady. We went to the small town of Williamson in West Virginia, and we had a little bit of extra time. Poor Sharif was hurting us like cats because, there's all these women and all these little stores and shops. So I wanted to go see a little antique shop that was down the street. I love to collect plates from different places. And we all went in there and looked around, and in the corner, when you first came in the shop, was this tiny little lady. And she didn't look anything like this lady here. The poor people are often the most generous, but that's who she was. I can't remember her name, but I'm going to call her Julia DeSalvo. I wrote her a thank you note. But we went all through her store, and everyone was picking out things or not, and then they bought their things. Well, I didn't have any cash with me, so I said to her, do you take Visa? No, I have 2 reasons for Visa. One, it keeps track of what I buy. But the other one is I get mileage, So for, I think, $4, I wanted to get my $4 worth of points. And this little sweet lady, I don't know if she took Visa or not, but I do know in the back of my mind that merchants have to absorb the cost of the Visa thing. So what she said to me, not with any, she said, honey, I'm just going to give you this, So I don't have it with me because I packed it away with my Christmas ornaments, but she gave me a little sheep that I just had loved this little sheep. And so I honor Julia DeSalvo for teaching me that the poor often have the most generous hearts. We saw this all over West Virginia. Another person was at the, we worked with the Catholic neighborhood, Catholic Charities Neighborhood Center. They are a place where people can come and get hot meals 3 times a day. And I talked to the director this morning, and her name is Pam, and we helped, how many bags did we straighten up? Because she wanted us to help her straighten her grocery bags, probably 3,000 or I don't know, a lot. One of the years we helped sort all the canned goods from the people in West Virginia, or in Wheeling. This was in Wheeling. So she told me that in January they served 10,262 meals, and 250 of those go out every day. So they have volunteers who prepare the meals, pack the meals, and then deliver the meals, almost like Meals on Wheels. So 250 people are served meals each day outside of the ones who come to the center. This place has been open since 1969, so that is 46 years that they have been doing this. And every day, different volunteers come in and cook and clean and interact with these people. And I just think that's an incredible ministry that the people in West Virginia have for each other. I don't have the current statistics, but a couple of years ago when we looked this up, the median income in Wheeling, West Virginia was $27,000. And to think that the people so generously gave canned goods, I don't know how many thousands of canned goods we sorted and that they gave to people. So I guess just my takeaway message is there are so many gifts that we received on this trip, and most of the gifts were the people that we met.
My slide. So I'm going to tell you guys about a little interesting detour that we had towards the end of our trip here that was not really in the books. Up in the highlands of West Virginia, there is the Palace of Gold and an associated interesting compound and various farming areas that are actually run by the Hare Krishnas. And some people may or may not be familiar with Hare Krishnas. They may have seen them in the airport handing out little roses. They've got kind of a marred history. They kind of grew out of the 60s, 70s generation, a lot of disillusionment, very cultish. But really they're based on Hinduistic and Vedic culture, and it's very spiritual. And up in the highlands, they have a couple thousand acres of land, this incredible palace, a very interesting campus that we stayed in dorms for hundreds of people, people who travel for various holidays up there and come to worship. But in addition to that, though, they are host to a small nonprofit called the Small Farm Training Center, which one of their devotees had decided to start. He originally was interested, had grown up on a farm and started this. So on their campus, unfortunately I don't have any good pictures of it, they have raised beds, they grow lettuce, they grow all sorts of different vegetables for not just the compound itself, but also, too, they give back to the community. The compound only uses about 10% of what they grow, and the rest is actually donated out to 6 to 7 different soup kitchens and food homes out and around Wheeling, West Virginia. This is just outside Wheeling. And so they're actually, especially in the last 10 years, have really integrated themselves in with the community and made a lot of different alliances with people to really support the community in general and the better good. Like I said, there's definitely a bias in their end. They have a certain amount of spiritual outlook that is kind of expected of them to involve their communities with that. But it's not required. The New Vrindavan, which is the name of this area, is involved with various community colleges and universities. They have grants from the cities and counties as well and various other nonprofits to study farming, to study urban renewal. We did actually walk around Wheeling, West Virginia with another fellow that we had met out there, And we witnessed they were growing community gardens under overpasses and in empty lots. And a lot of the data and information that they have there was brought in through New Vrindavan and through other various grants. And so there's a lot of community working together here to try and get some grassroots efforts on local and sustainable farming, and really just not only just improving the cities themselves, but also to just hopefully uplift everybody to try and get everybody to work communally. Specifically, they work with apprentice programs. They've got sustainability research. There's a big environmental stewardship that is involved, and that again goes back to a Hinduistic and Vedic culture, which is very respectful of the environment. They are lacto-vegetarians, so again, a lot of respect for animals and meats, and then also pushing things like food quality and security, something that, especially in areas like West Virginia where it is difficult, there's not as many open, wide plains for farming. It's very hilly, so food security is a big issue for them as well. And then what they work with in West Virginia, specifically in Wheeling, is called the Green Wheeling Initiative. And that's community initiatives and university involvements working together to kind of, again, further this idea of sustainable farming, community involvement, and also to a cyclical process that helps uphold their communities, working with the food banks, working with other Catholic, Christian, and also to other Hinduistic and Vedic, and really any type of faith-based organization. I will admit there's some interesting things involved here, as they mentioned too, with the issues of coal and fracking. The most recent information that I found out through our research after the trip, New Vrindavan has agreed to allow fracking underneath their campus, and it will bring in millions of dollars to them that they plan on reinvesting into the farming, plan on expanding their outreach, plan on expanding their apprenticeships. But again, there's this contrast that at some point there's a need, but also too they're using the money from the need to create something better, which is I think there's a lot of positive things from that, but there's always a negative side to it. So everybody has to take into consideration things like the impacts of fracking and drilling, especially in areas that are open for farming, that use well water, that may be contaminated. So that's also something too that the community really needs to take into consideration. That I'm sure at some point somebody has probably mentioned it, but at the same time too, short-term results or long-term results need to be considered. At least on the plus side here, we've got a good surplus of food going to the food banks, providing fresh vegetables to places that normally just get, leftovers, starchy products, canned foods, things that are not really fresh. These guys are providing things like lettuce and fresh beets and potatoes and other vegetables. So, I'm not going to get too much into some of the conflicts or the history of the Hare Krishnas or New Vrindavan, but at the same time too, there's definitely a nice integratory approach that some of the people on that campus are working with the local communities to hopefully create some sustainability and impact things for the better.
Okay, so one of the things that we did at the end of our trip too is that we participated in a call to action, which was just basically like now that we had seen what we had seen, what were we willing to come back home and change or do differently in our lives? And so one of the things that we wanted to bring to you guys is just the option and the opportunity to participate with us in our call to action. And one of the things that we talked about earlier was the idea of stereotypes. And how damaging they can be, but how a lot of them are actually rooted in deep social inequalities, and especially healthcare inequalities is what we saw a lot of in West Virginia. So basically what we were seeing is that people were taking these stereotypes and instead of actually investigating the root causes behind them, they were just using them to dismiss what they felt, dismiss what they thought, and they talked about Beth earlier, and the quote that she said is, "If I believe the stereotypes about you," and then there should be another part around there somewhere, will it be easier for me to ignore the real injustices in your life? And that was one thing, I guess, that really hit home with me, is that I see a lot of myself doing that in clinical experience and in the hospital, and as healthcare providers, just the option and the opportunity to dismiss people based on the stereotypes and commonly held cultural beliefs that we have about people. We talked earlier, and Alicia said about If I see someone come in, am I going to look at them and say, oh, they're just here, they're drug seeking? Or would I actually investigate, is there something more that's bringing them in? Is there a social inequality, a healthcare-driven inequality that we could address here? And Charlotte spoke at the beginning about how some of the things that we will see will make us feel deeply uncomfortable, and what will we do with that uncomfortable feeling? So I think my call to action, our call to action for ourselves and for you, is that you would just allow yourselves to feel uncomfortable in situations where you think, oh, should I just buy into this stereotype? Should I just believe what everyone else on the floor is believing? Or should you let yourselves be uncomfortable, let yourselves think like, maybe there's something else here. Maybe there's something else that's actually going on. And I think just becoming aware of those social inequalities can move us to action, especially when we see them in our own communities. We start to ask ourselves, is there something more that I could be doing, that I should be doing? And as a healthcare professionals, I think we all hold an incredible place of authority to make those decisions and changes that can affect not just one person's life, not just one person's healthcare outcome, but healthcare as a whole and the way that we really view how we care for the whole person. So that was something that we took away as a call to action. And then we also have...
Well, there's this video that we wanted to show you. It's called Switch. It's a documentary just about different options as far as types of energy that we can use. But in the interest of time, we're just going to tell you about it, and then you can watch it, I guess, right?
Well, our plan is that we're going to get a screening of this here at Regis, so we wanted to let you know about that and to watch for that screening. It kind of looks at all the different energy sources that are out there, and really it's an honest look at the use of energy. So watch for information to come out about this screening. We're thinking maybe like the end of March or early April or something. So we'll put that information out. But we do have time for maybe like a couple of questions that, so I wanted to open this floor up to any questions that people might have. It's hard to capture all of our experiences that we had in 9 days, but hopefully that kind of gave you a broad overview of some of the things we saw, did, and learned. Any questions? Yeah. So we offer this trip potentially twice a year, but we know for sure that the next one will be in December. Are you a January accelerated student? So we did have, as you saw, January accelerated students on this trip, and basically it happens after your last clinical ends before graduation. So it certainly is open to January accelerated students. It originally started as a trip for May students because there was no offerings for them, but we've expanded that now. So. Other questions? I saw some other hands. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody want to talk about where we slept or ate? A variety of different places. When we first got there, we were staying in Charleston, which is the capital of West Virginia, and we called it the Catholic Hotel. It's a Catholic retreat center. So it was actually really nice because we had beds, and that was our first time staying there. In Kermit, we stayed on the floor of the after-school community center. So we got out. You know, some of us stayed in tree houses, and some of us so on the floor there, and then we stayed back in Charleston at the Catholic Hotel. So, and then the Hare Krishna Center, we stayed there for a couple nights. One last question. I just want to say that truly it's an honor for me to get to have these experiences with these students and the faculty that I get to. So thank you for being so engaged and being such a great group of students. And I think we should all give them a round of applause for taking that time out. You all know how busy student schedules can be, so you guys have a lot to be proud of. One last thing, and thank you for coming today and learning about this. We have a few minutes afterwards that if you want to share anything. One last thing I want to share with this group while I had, and a bunch of people have left already, but we have our 9 Health Fair, our annual 9 Health Fair here at Regis on Saturday, April 6th. And for the Service Learning Project for our traditional senior students, they're responsible for planning most of the aspects of the fair, but we need help staffing the volunteer portions of our fair, and we do have some volunteer positions available that I brought some sign-up sheets, so if you have a few minutes afterwards, maybe you can come up here and I can talk to you and just get your name down, and we can place you at our fair if you're interested in serving in our 9 Health Fair this year on Saturday, April 6th. So. Thank you. And there are even positions at the 9 Health Fair for non-medical people, so I see some of you out there.